After I refused to pay for my sister's $45,000 wedding, she invited me to a casual dinner. 3 lawyers were waiting with documents. She said, "Sign this or I'll ruin you." And I said, "Meet my husband." What he handed them shut everything down. This story from Daily Reddit readings, so watch till end for plot and twist. My name is Francesca, and if there is one thing I know as a senior actuary for one of the largest insurance firms in New York City, it is that value is rarely what it appears to be on the surface. I calculate risk for a living. I look at numbers and I tell billionaires whether their next venture is going to soar or crash. My clients pay me a retainer that could buy a small island. But to my family, I'm just Jazz, the boring girl who works with spreadsheets and probably makes $40,000 a year. I never corrected them. In my family, silence is not just golden, it is a survival strategy. That Sunday morning I sat in a booth at Sarah Beth's near Central Park, staring at a menu where the avocado toast cost $24. I calculated the markup in my head automatically. $3 for the bread, 50 cents for the egg, maybe $2 for the avocado. The rest was paying for the location, the brand, and the privilege of being seen by people who pretended not to notice you. I took a iced tea and checked my watch. They were 20 minutes late. This was standard operating procedure for the Williams women. Being late was their way of establishing dominance. Finally, the glass door swung open, and in walked a parade of chaos disguised as high fashion. My sister Tiana was leading the charge. She was wearing a dress that screamed for attention, a neon pink number with cutouts that were perhaps a bit too ambitious for a Sunday brunch. On her arms swung a quilted black bag with the famous interlocking C logo. From 10 feet away it looked impressive. From where I sat I could see the stitching was slightly uneven, and the gold hardware was a shade too yellow. It was a Canal Street knockoff, but Tiana carried it like it held the nuclear codes. Behind her trailed my mother Beatrice, looking like she was on her way to a church service, where the dress code was competitive holiness. And bringing up the rear was Connor, my future brother-in-law. The man Tiana had been gushing about for 6 months. The man who was supposedly a vice president at a hedge fund. He was tall with that specific kind of confident slouch that suggests he has never been told no in his life. He wore a navy blazer with gold buttons and loafers with no socks. They arrived at the table in a flurry of air kisses and perfume that smelled like vanilla and desperation. Tiana slid into the booth opposite me, and immediately pulled out her phone. She did not say hello. She held the phone up high, finding her light. "Hey guys, we are here at Sarah Beth's, with the fam for a little wedding planning meeting." Tiana chirped into the screen, her voice rising an octave to that fake influencer pitch. "So excited to show you all the details, stay tuned." She ended the video, and her smile dropped instantly. She looked at me, and frowned. "You could have dressed up a little, Jazz. It is Sarah Beth's, not a cafeteria." I looked down at my simple linen blouse and tailored trousers. They were from the Row, and cost more than Tiana's entire outfit combined. But they did not have logos plastered all over them, so to my sister they were invisible. "I am fine, Tiana," I said calmly. "You are late." "Traffic was a nightmare," Connor interjected, sliding in next to Tiana. He did not apologize. He just signaled the waiter with a snap of his fingers that made my skin crawl. "Garçon, we will start with a bottle of the Veuve Clicquot, the vintage if you have it." I watched him carefully. Connor Sterling, the man with the prestigious last name, and the vague job description. He rested his hand on the table, and my eyes went straight to his wrist. A Rolex Submariner. It was heavy and shiny. But as I watched the second hand, I saw it tick. Tick tick tick. A real Rolex has a sweeping movement. It glides. Connor's watch was ticking like a time bomb of insecurity. So Francesca, Connor turned his gaze to me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Tiana tells me you are still doing the data entry thing. What is it called again?" "An actuary." Sounds thrilling. I took a slow sip of my tea. "It is risk assessment, Connor. I analyze financial probabilities. Write data." Connor waved his hand dismissively. "I could never do that. Boring office work. In the hedge fund world, it is all about instinct. You have to have the gut for the big kills. I just closed a deal last week that would make your head spin. 7 figures. "That is impressive," I said, keeping my face completely neutral. "Which fund are you with again?" "Oh, a boutique firm downtown," Connor said vaguely, taking a gulp of the water. "Very exclusive. We manage private wealth for old money families. You would not know them." My mother beamed at him, patting his arm. "Connor is so talented, Francesca. He is going to take such good care of Tiana." unlike some men we know. That was a jab at my husband Malik. My mother had never forgiven Malik for showing up to our first family dinner in a hoodie and jeans. She decided then and there that he was a low-level IT technician. I never told her that Malik owns the tech consulting firm and charges $500 an hour just to pick up the phone. I learned a long time ago that my mother only loves money she can borrow. If she knew our real net worth, she would drain us dry. So, she continued, her eyes narrowing at me. We are not here to talk about work. We are here for the wedding. Tiana, show your sister the vision. Tiana pushed aside her cutlery and hefted a massive white binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. On the cover in gold glitter glue were the words, Tiana and Connor. A love eternal. She opened the binder with the reverence of a priest opening a Bible. Okay, so obviously we are booking the plaza, Tiana announced. I choked slightly on my ice cube. The plaza. Yes, the plaza, Connor said, leaning back and spreading his arms. Nothing else is good enough for my princess. We need a venue that matches the Sterling family legacy. I looked at his ticking watch and wondered if the Sterling legacy came with a warranty. The deposit is already down, Tiana said, quickly flipping past the venue page. But here is where we need to talk details, specifically the floral arrangements. She turned the page to a mood board filled with cascading white peonies, rare orchids, and walls of white roses. It looked like a botanical garden had exploded inside a ballroom. I want a winter wonderland theme, Tiana explained, her eyes gleaming. But in June. So we need to import specific peonies from Holland, and the orchids have to be flown in from Thailand 2 days before the ceremony to ensure freshness. That sounds lovely, I said cautiously. And expensive. Quality costs. Francesca Connor sneered. Something you might not understand with your department store budget lifestyle. But in our world, presentation is everything. Tiana tapped a manicured fingernail on a spreadsheet at the bottom of the page. So the florist quoted us this morning. It is a steal, honestly. I leaned forward to look at the number. My brain, which processes numbers faster than I process emotions, stopped for a second. $45,000, I read aloud. Tiana, that is $45,000. Just for flowers. For the flowers, the installation and the teardown, she corrected. And the preservation of my bridal bouquet. It is a package deal. That is more than most people make in a year, I said, keeping my voice level. Oh, do not be such a buzzkill, Jazz, my mother snapped. This is your sister's special day. She deserves the best. She is the first one in this family to marry into real status. We have to make a good impression on Connor's family. I looked at Connor. If he was so rich, why were we having a meeting about the budget? So I said, leaning back, why are you showing me this? If the deposit is paid and the plan is set, congratulations. It looks beautiful. The table went silent. Tiana looked at Mom. Mom looked at Connor. Connor looked at his fake Rolex. Well, Tiana started, her voice dropping that fake influencer tone, and adopting the wheedling whine I had known since childhood. Here is the thing, Jazz. Mom's money is tied up in the house renovations right now. And Connor's assets are all illiquid. You know how it is with investments. You can not just pull cash out whenever you want. I did know how it is with investments. I also knew that illiquid assets was code for broke. So Connor said, taking charge. We discussed it, and we decided that as the big sister, it would be a great honor for you to sponsor the floral arrangements. Sponsor, I repeated. You want me to pay $45,000 for flowers. Think of it as your wedding gift, Tiana said, smiling brightly as if she had just offered me a favor. Mom said you have been saving up since you never go on vacations or buy nice clothes. You probably have that much sitting in a checking account doing nothing. My mother leaned in her face, settling into a mask of serious piety. Francesca, the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is expected. You have no children, you have no responsibilities. Your husband works in computers, so I know he is not bringing much to the table. But you have your steady little job. It is time you stepped up for this family. You have always been the selfish one, keeping your money to yourself while your sister struggles to build a life. Struggles. I thought, looking at her fake Chanel bag and her fresh manicure. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, making sure I understood the audacity of the request. You want me to write a check for $45,000? Today. For flowers that will die in 12 hours. Because Connor is too rich to pay for them and Mom is too poor to pay for them. It is not about the money, Francesca Connor said, his voice dripping with condescension. It is about duty. In my family, siblings support each other. If I had a brother in your position, I would not even have to ask. He would have offered. It is honestly embarrassing that we even have to have this conversation. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was the moment. The pivot point. I could write the check and buy their silence for another 6 months. I could keep playing the role of the pushover daughter, the boring actuary, who exists only to subsidize their delusions. Or I could finally close the ledger. I looked at the menu again. I am not paying $45,000 for flowers, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of our table it landed like a hammer. Excuse me? Tiana blinked. I said no. I am not paying for it. Not $45,000. Not $4,000. Not $40. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls theatrically. Francesca, how dare you? After everything we have done for you, we took you in when you gave birth to me, Mom. I cut her off. You did not take me in. You raised me. That is the bare minimum requirement of parenting. Connor slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Listen here, Francesca. Maybe you do not understand how these things work. This wedding is happening, and you are going to contribute. We have already told the florist the deposit is coming from your account. You did what I asked. My eyes narrowing. We gave them your billing info. Tiana shrugged. From that check you sent for Mom's birthday last month. The routing number was on it. They are running the charge tomorrow. I stared at them. They had not just asked. They had stolen. They had taken my bank information and authorized a charge equal to a luxury car without my permission. They thought I was trapped. They thought I would be too embarrassed to cause a scene, too afraid of losing their approval to stop the payment. They thought they were dealing with Francesca the doormat. But they forgot one thing. I am a risk assessor. And I had just determined that this relationship was a total loss. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. What are you doing? Connor demanded. I am locking my accounts, I said, tapping the screen. And then I am calling the fraud department to report an unauthorized transaction attempt. If that florist tries to run my card tomorrow, it will be declined, and they will be flagged for investigation. You would not dare. Tiana shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. You will ruin my wedding. I stood up. I did not care about the stares from the other tables anymore. You ruined your own wedding when you decided to spend money. You do not have to impress people you do not like, I said. I picked up my purse. I am leaving. And, Tiana, for my wedding gift. I am getting you a toaster. A really nice one. It has 4 slots. I walked away as my mother started screaming scripture at my back, and Connor yelled about how I was going to regret crossing the Sterling family. I walked out of Sarah Beth's, into the bright New York sunlight, and took a deep breath. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. But I was wrong. That was just the opening move. They did not just want my money. They wanted to destroy me. And 2 weeks later, when Tiana called me with that sweet, apologetic voice, inviting me to a reconciliation dinner, I should have known better. I should have known that when a predator smiles, it is not because they are happy. It is because they are about to feed. I stepped into a taxi and gave the driver my address. My phone buzzed. A text from Tiana. You will pay for this, Francesca. One way or another. I deleted the text. But as I watched the city blur past the window, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not just calculating the risk. I was ready to be the danger. The silence that followed my refusal was heavy enough to crush the delicate porcelain cups on the table. For a moment the hum of conversation in the upscale restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving us in a bubble of tension that felt suffocating. Tiana stared at me with her mouth slightly open, as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. Connor looked at his water glass, a tight smile frozen on his face, while his brain tried to process the fact that someone had actually said no to him. But it was my mother whose reaction was the most practiced. Beatrice Williams did not get angry immediately. That was amateur hour. Instead, she let her lower lip tremble. She widened her eyes until they shimmered with unshed tears. And then she looked around the room just to make sure she had an audience. Once she was satisfied that the couple at the next table was watching, she let out a sound that was half sigh and half sob. She reached into her purse and pulled out a lace handkerchief that she kept specifically for moments of emotional manipulation. Francesca, she whispered, her voice trembling with a theatrical fragility that would have won her a Tony Award. I do not understand what has happened to your heart, I really do not. She dabbed at her dry eyes and shook her head. I remember when you were a little girl, she continued, raising her volume just enough so the waiter refilling water 3 tables away could hear. I remember how we sacrificed for you. Your father and I worked double shifts. We went without new clothes. We went without vacations just so you could have books and school supplies. We poured everything into you, Francesca. Every drop of our blood and sweat. And now, when your sister needs you just this once you close your hand. She paused for effect, and then reached for the ultimate weapon, her leather-bound travel Bible, which she placed on the table next to the mimosa pitcher. The good book says, "To whom much is given, much is required," she quoted, looking at me with a mix of judgment and pity. It says, "Honor your father and mother so that your days may be long." Are you honoring us, Francesca? Is this how you honor the family that made you? By hoarding your wealth while your sister suffers. By putting a price tag on love. I watched her performance with the detached, analytical gaze of a risk assessor. I categorized her statements as historical revisionism. My father had worked hard, yes, but Beatrice had spent most of my childhood buying lottery tickets and designer knockoffs while I cooked dinner for Tiana. The books she mentioned were from the public library because she refused to buy them. The sacrifice she spoke of was mostly mine. I was the one who tutored Tiana through high school. I was the one who co-signed her first car loan, which she defaulted on, leaving me to clean up the mess. I am not hoarding wealth, mother, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I am setting a boundary. There is a difference. Boundary. Beatrice spat the word out like it was a curse. That is a word for white people, Francesca. In this family we do not have boundaries. We have loyalty, we have sacrifice. But you would not know anything about that, would you? You have become so cold, so distant. This was the cue for Tiana to join the fray. She had recovered from her shock, and now the embarrassment was setting in. She saw the waiters glancing at our table. She saw the judgmental looks from the wealthy patrons she was so desperate to impress. And she blamed me. You are doing this on purpose, she hissed, leaning across the table. Her face, which had been perfectly contoured, was now twisting into a mask of ugly rage. You waited until now to humiliate me. You could have just said yes. You could have just written the check. But no. You wanted to make me beg. You wanted to make Connor look bad in front of everyone. I did not ask for this meeting, Tiana, I reminded her. You invited me. You asked for the money. I just gave you an answer you did not like. You are jealous, Tiana said, her voice rising in pitch. That is what this is. You are jealous because I'm getting the fairy tale. I am marrying a sterling. I am going to have the big wedding, and the beautiful house, and the legacy. And what do you have, Francesca? A boring job, a boring husband who fixes computers, and an empty house. She stood up then. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, and suddenly we were the center of attention. You want me to be looked down on by his family, she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You want them to think I am cheap. You want them to think we are trash. Because you are miserable, Francesca. You are miserable because you are 35 years old and you are dried up. The room went completely silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the music seemed to stop. Tiana did not stop. She was fueled by the adrenaline of her own cruelty. That is why you are hoarding your money, isn't it? She sneered, looking down at me with pure venom. Because you have nothing else to spend it on. You cannot have children. You are a barren, empty shell. So you try to control us with your cash because you know you will never have a real family of your own. You are just a bitter, selfish, barren woman who cannot stand to see her little sister happy and fertile and loved. The word barren hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It was a low blow even for Tiana. She knew about the miscarriages. She knew about the years of IVF treatments Malik and I had gone through privately. She knew the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever be a mother. I had told her those things in confidence years ago, during a moment of weakness when I thought she actually cared. Now she was weaponizing my deepest pain in the middle of a crowded restaurant just because I wouldn't buy her peonies. I felt a physical blow to my chest, a sharp ache that threatened to double me over. My hands trembled beneath the table. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and shatter every glass in the room. I wanted to hurt her back. But then I looked at Connor. He was sitting there with a small smirk on his face. He was not embarrassed by his fiancée's outburst. He looked entertained. He looked superior. He took a sip of his wine and swirled the glass, looking at me with eyes that were cold and calculating. Ladies, please, he said, his voice smooth and dripping with condescension. There is no need for such theatrics. He turned his gaze to me. Look, Francesca, let us be adults here. I understand that $45,000 seems like a monumental sum to you. For people in your bracket, it is a lot of money. I get it. You have to count your pennies. You have to save for your retirement, because you do not have generational wealth to fall back on. He leaned forward, his fake Rolex glinting under the chandelier. But you have to understand who you're dealing with. For the sterlings, $45,000 is a rounding error. It is pocket change. I dropped that much on a guy's trip to Vegas without blinking. The only reason we are asking you is out of tradition. We wanted to give you a chance to be part of something elevated, something high class. I thought you had a little more dignity than this. I thought you wanted to prove that you could belong at our table. But I guess you cannot buy class, can you? He chuckled, shaking his head, as if he were disappointed in a slow child. I looked at him. I looked at the man who claimed $45,000 was pocket change yet was currently wearing a suit that did not fit properly in the shoulders. I looked at the man who claimed to have generational wealth yet was bullying his fiancée's sister into paying for flowers. The pain in my chest vanished. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like ice water running through my veins. They were not family. They were parasites, and they had just made the mistake of trying to feed on a shark. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not flip the table. I simply raised my hand and signaled the waiter. The young man rushed over looking terrified. He had clearly heard everything, and was probably praying I wouldn't make a scene. "Check, please," I said calmly. "Separate checks," the waiter blinked. "Separate checks, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "I will be paying for my iced tea. The rest of the table will cover their own bill." My mother gasped. "Francesca, you cannot leave us with this bill. We ordered the vintage champagne." "That sounds like a problem for people with generational wealth," I said, not looking at her. I pulled out my black American Express Centurion card. The waiter's eyes widened slightly when he saw it. It was a card invited only to high net worth individuals, the kind of card Connor had probably only seen in movies. I placed it on the tray. "Run it for the tea," I said. "And add $100 tip for yourself. I apologize for the noise at this table." Tiana was still standing, breathing heavily, her face blotchy. She realized suddenly that I was actually leaving. She realized that the $45,000 was not coming. She realized that the $300 brunch bill was about to land in her lap, and her credit cards were maxed out. "You are not leaving," she shrieked. "You cannot just walk away. We are family." I signed the receipt with a steady hand. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my linen trousers. I picked up my purse and walked around the table to where Tiana stood. She flinched as if she thought I was going to hit her. But I just leaned in close so only she could hear me. The smell of her cheap vanilla perfume was overwhelming, but I didn't back away. I looked her dead in the eye. "You said I was barren, Tiana. Maybe I am, but at least I am not empty. You are drowning in debt, you are marrying a fraud, and you are selling your soul for a wedding you cannot afford." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And as for your gift, I meant what I said. I am getting you a toaster. It is the only thing you are going to get from me that has any warmth." I straightened up and looked at Connor one last time. "Nice watch, Connor," I said loud enough for the table to hear. "But you might want to get the battery checked. Real Rolexes do not tick." I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. Behind me, chaos erupted. "Francesca, get back here," my mother screamed. "You are dead to me," Tiana yelled, her voice cracking. "Do not show your face at my wedding. I hate you." I heard Connor arguing with the waiter, trying to explain that his cards were in his other wallet. I heard the sound of glass breaking. I heard the whispers of the other diners. But I did not look back. I walked out of those glass doors and into the noise of the city. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking, but my head was high. I had just cut the cord. I had just severed the tie. It hurt. God, it hurt. But as I hailed a cab and climbed inside, I realized something else. I was free. Or so I thought. Because as I watched the restaurant disappear in the rearview mirror, I didn't know that my mother was already reaching for her phone. I didn't know that Tiana was already drying her tears and planning her next move. I didn't know that by the time I got home, my face would be all over the internet, and the war would be just beginning. I thought I had ended it. But the truth was, I had just declared war on people who had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous enemies of all. The heavy oak door of my bed-stuy brownstone clicked shut behind me, locking out the noise of the city and the chaos of the last hour. I leaned my back against the cool wood and closed my eyes, finally letting out the breath I had been holding since I left the restaurant. This house was my sanctuary. It was a 4-story masterpiece of late 19th century architecture with original crown moldings, mahogany banisters, and the kind of solid construction that made you feel safe from the world. My grandmother had bought it for pennies in the 70s when nobody wanted to live in Brooklyn, and she had left it to me specifically because she knew I was the only one who would preserve it rather than sell it to the highest bidder for quick cash. To my mother and sister, this house was just a pile of money sitting in the form of bricks. They saw the gentrification of the neighborhood, the coffee shops opening on the corner, and the property values skyrocket, and they saw dollar signs. They did not see the history. They did not see the nights I spent sanding the floors by hand, or the weekends Malik and I spent restoring the plasterwork. They just saw an asset that I was selfishly hoarding. I kicked off my heels and walked softly down the hallway toward the back of the house where Malik had his home office. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt expensive. The central air hummed almost imperceptibly, and the thick Persian rugs absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I wanted nothing more than to walk into Malik's office, crawl into his lap, and tell him everything. I wanted him to hold me and tell me that I was not crazy, that I was not the villain my family made me out to be. But when I reached the double doors of his study, I stopped. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette. He was pacing back and forth, a phone pressed to his ear. I cracked the door open just an inch. "We cannot accept those terms," Gerald Malik was saying, his voice low and dangerous. It was a tone I rarely heard him use. "If they want to push for a hostile takeover, we will bury them in regulatory filings until the next fiscal year. Tell the board to hold the line. I am looking at the merger agreement right now, and there is a poison pill clause they missed." I watched him for a moment. He was wearing his favorite, worn-out Howard University hoodie, but his posture was all shark. On his desk, 3 monitors were glowing with spreadsheets and legal briefs that would make the average lawyer weep. He was in the middle of closing a deal that was probably worth more than the entire gross domestic product of a small country. My mother thought he fixed printers for a living because he never talked about his work at family gatherings. She did not know that the man she called lazy was currently orchestrating a billion-dollar defense strategy for a Fortune 500 company. He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. I knew he had been up since 4 in the morning. If I went in there now with my family drama, I would be adding a straw to a camel's back that was already straining. I could not do that to him. He was fighting real wars. My war was just a petty skirmish over flowers and ego. I gently pulled the door closed without making a sound. I was alone. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still trembling slightly. I took a sip, trying to wash away the taste of the argument. That was when my phone on the counter began to buzz. It started with a single vibration, then another, then a continuous angry hum that rattled the marble countertop. I stared at the screen. A notification from Instagram popped up. "Tiana Williams is live." My stomach dropped. I knew I should not look. I knew nothing good could come from watching my sister perform for her 3,000 followers. But it was like a car crash. I could not look away. I tapped the notification. The screen filled with Tiana's face. She was sitting in her car, the one I knew she was 3 months behind on payments for. The lighting was poor, but it highlighted the tears streaming down her cheeks. Real or fake, it did not matter. On camera they looked devastating. "Guys," she sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I do not usually do this. I try to keep things positive, you know. But I am just so broken right now." The comments were already flying up the side of the screen. Heart emojis. Broken heart emojis. People asking what happened. "I just came from a meeting with my sister," Tiana said, looking directly into the camera lens. "We were supposed to be planning my wedding, the happiest time of my life, right? But instead she humiliated me." She paused to let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal. "My fiancé Connor and I, we are trying our best. But things are tight. And my sister? She is rich, guys. Like really rich. She lives in our grandmother's house. The house that was supposed to be for all of us. But she tricked Grandma into signing it over to her right before she died." I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. That was a lie. A bold, malicious lie. Grandma had signed the house over to me 5 years before she passed because she was terrified that Beatrice would sell it to pay off gambling debts. I had the competency hearings on tape. I had the lawyer's notes. But the truth is boring. The lie was sensational. She stole our inheritance. Tiana continued, her voice gaining strength from the validation of her audience. She lives in a mansion while Mom and I struggle. And today when I asked her for help, just a little help to make my wedding day special, she laughed in my face. She told me I was pathetic. She threw money at me and walked out. The comments section was a cesspool of outrage. Wow, what a snake. Karma will get her. Family comes first. That is shameful. This is why you cannot trust anyone, even blood. I watched as user after user piled on. People I did not know. Strangers from across the country were judging me based on the performance of a woman who once stole my identity to open a credit card at Sephora. Then the text messages started. It began with Aunt Sarah, the family matriarch, now that Grandma was gone. Sarah had always liked me, but she loved peace more than she loved truth. Francesca, I am seeing this video. Please tell me you did not leave your mother and sister with the bill. You have so much, and they have so little. Fix this. Then came my cousin Marcus, who owed me $2,000 I knew I would never see again. You are foul for that, Jazz. Mom is crying watching this. You need to apologize and cut that check. Do not forget where you came from. Then came the messages from numbers I did not even have saved. Distant relatives, friends of the family, people who had not spoken to me in a decade but felt entitled to weigh in on my character. Selfish, bougie, sellout, Oreo. That last one stung the most. It was the insult they always used when I succeeded. When I got straight A's, I was acting white. When I got into a top university, I was forgetting my roots. When I bought a brownstone and restored it instead of letting it crumble, I was gentrifying my own history. To them, my success was an indictment of their stagnation. And now Tiana had given them a weapon to attack me with. I put the phone down face down on the counter. The buzzing continued, a relentless drumbeat of notification after notification. I looked around my beautiful kitchen, the custom cabinets I had designed, the vintage stove I had hunted down in an estate sale, the light pouring in from the garden window. It was everything I had ever wanted. It was the physical manifestation of my hard work and discipline. So, why did I feel so small? I felt the walls closing in. The silence of the house, which had been a comfort minutes ago, now felt oppressive. It felt like isolation. I was the girl in this big house on the hill, and down in the village the townspeople were lighting their torches. I wanted to march into the living room and turn on the television to drown out the noise in my head, but I knew I would just see Tiana's face in my mind. I wanted to call my best friend getting drinks in the city, but I was too ashamed to explain that my own sister was publicly dragging me through the mud. So I stood there in the middle of my $1,000,000 kitchen, feeling like the poorest woman in the world. I walked over to the fridge and opened it, staring blindly at the contents. I wasn't hungry, I just needed to look at something orderly. Rows of sparkling water, fresh vegetables in the crisper. Containers of meal prep that Malik and I had made on Sunday. Order, logic, structure. My family was chaos. They were a hurricane that swept through and destroyed everything in its path, demanding that you thank them for the rain. I closed the fridge and leaned my forehead against the cool stainless steel. Be the bigger person. That was what everyone always said. Just apologize. Just pay the money. Keep the peace. But peace at the expense of my dignity wasn't peace. It was surrender. The buzzing stopped for a moment, then started again with a different rhythm. A call. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother. I let it ring. I knew exactly what she would say. She would not be angry. That was not her style. When she wanted something, she would be weeping. She would say she was having chest pains. She would say her blood pressure was spiking, and it was all my fault. She would weaponize her health just like Tiana weaponized her tears. I declined the call. Immediately a text appeared. If I end up in the hospital tonight, it is on your hands. I stared at the words. The manipulation was so blatant, so clumsy, and yet it still found that little hook in my heart. The little girl inside me who just wanted her mommy to love her. The little girl who thought that if she was just good enough, smart enough, rich enough, maybe then she would be worthy of affection. But I was not a little girl anymore. I was a 35-year-old woman with a mortgage, a career, and a husband who was currently fighting off corporate raiders in the next room. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I did not text back. Instead, I opened my settings. I scrolled down to the blockers. I selected Tiana's number. Block. I selected my mother's number. Block. I selected Aunt Sarah and cousin Marcus. Block. Block. The buzzing stopped. The silence returned. But this time, it did not feel empty. It felt like the silence after a storm has passed. I was alone in the house, yes, but I was safe. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hydrangeas I had planted. They were blooming beautifully. I thought about Tiana's demand for $45,000 worth of flowers that would be dead by morning. My flowers were real. My life was real. And then I saw it. A car pulled up to the curb outside. A black sedan. Not a taxi. Not an Uber. It was an older model beat up with a dent in the passenger door. I recognized it immediately. It was Aunt Sarah's car. They were not just attacking me online. They were coming here. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I checked the security panel by the back door. The alarm was set. The doors were locked. But they knew the code. I had given the gate code to Aunt Sarah 2 years ago when she came to water the plants while we were on vacation. I had never changed it. I watched on the security monitor as the gate clicked open. Aunt Sarah stepped out, followed by my mother. Beatrice did not look like a woman having a heart attack. She looked like a general marching into battle, and behind them was Tiana holding her phone up, presumably still live-streaming the invasion of my home. They were walking up the path to my front door. I looked toward Malik's office. He was still on the phone, pacing faster now. I could not disturb him. I could not let this circus interrupt his work. I had to handle this. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my shirt, and walked to the front door. I did not open it. I engaged the deadbolt audibly. Then I pressed the button for the intercom. "Go away," I said, my voice amplified by the speaker outside. I saw my mother stop on the porch. She looked up at the camera, her eyes narrowed. "Open this door, Francesca," Beatrice demanded. "We need to talk. Family business." "I am calling the police," I said calmly. "You are trespassing." Tiana laughed, a shrill sound that distorted through the speaker. "You are going to call the cops on your own mother? Go ahead. Let everyone see what kind of monster you are." I looked at the monitor. Tiana was filming the door, filming the house, filming her own mother pounding on the wood. I reached for my phone again. But this time I didn't call the police. I opened my email. I found the draft I had written months ago. The one titled, "Cease and Desist." The one I had prepared the last time they tried to extort me, but had been too soft to send. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I sent a text to the private security firm that patrolled our neighborhood. Priority 1. Intruder on premises. I watched on the screen as the security patrol car turned the corner, just 30 seconds later. The flashing yellow lights swept across my mother's furious face. The war had moved from the internet to my doorstep. And I was done retreating. The next morning I walked into my office tower in Midtown Manhattan, trying to leave the chaos of my family behind me. My building is a fortress of glass and steel, a place where logic, rules, and emotions are left at the revolving doors. I love the silence of the elevator ride up to the 42nd floor. I love the swipe of my security badge, which granted me access to rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. Here I was not Francesca, the ungrateful daughter, or the selfish sister. Here I was Francesca Williams, senior partner, and one of the most respected risk assessors in the industry. My office was my sanctuary, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River and the quiet hum of productivity that soothed my frayed nerves. I sat down at my desk and opened a complex file regarding a maritime merger, hoping to lose myself in the actuarial tables. But my peace lasted exactly 45 minutes. The phone on my desk rang. It was the internal line from the lobby security desk. I picked it up, expecting a courier, or perhaps a client arriving early for a meeting. "Miss Williams, I apologize for disturbing you," the security guard Mike said, his voice tight with professional discomfort. "There is a woman down here. She claims to be your mother. She does not have an appointment, and she is refusing to leave until she sees you. She is causing quite a disturbance, ma'am." My stomach dropped to the floor. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Of course she was here. I should have calculated this variable. Beatrice Williams did not accept defeat. She viewed boundaries as challenges to be bulldozed. "Is she yelling, Mike?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "She is crying, ma'am," Mike replied. "She is telling anyone who will listen that her daughter is letting her starve in the lobby, while sitting in an ivory tower. People are staring. I really need you to come down and handle this, or I will have to have her escorted out by the NYPD. Do not call the police," I said quickly. The last thing I needed was my mother being arrested in the lobby of my firm. It would make the industry gossip columns by lunch. "I am coming down." I hung up the phone and walked to the elevator. My legs felt heavy. Every floor that ticked by on the display felt like a descent into hell. When the doors opened on the ground level, I could hear her before I saw her. Beatrice was standing near the turnstiles wearing her Sunday best and navy blue suit, with a hat that looked ridiculous under the fluorescent corporate lights. She was clutching her purse with both hands, and speaking loudly to a group of young interns who looked terrified. I raised her alone, she was wailing. I scrubbed floors so she could work in a place like this. And now she treats me like a stranger. Mother. My voice cut through her performance like a knife. She spun around, her eyes lighting up with a mix of triumph and fury. The tears vanished, instantly replaced by a look of steely determination that I knew all too well. Francesca, she said, smoothing her skirt. Finally, do you know how humiliating it is to be stopped by security like a common criminal? I am your mother. I should have a key to this building. This is a secure financial institution, Mother, I said, guiding her away from the staring interns toward a quiet corner near the fountain. Nobody has a key, except the CEO. Why are you here? I told you yesterday that I am done. You do not get to be done with family, Francesca, she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think because you have a security badge and a fancy office you are better than us. You think you can just walk away from your obligations. I have no obligations to fund a $45,000 flower arrangement, I said, crossing my arms. This is not about the flowers anymore, Beatrice said, her eyes narrowing. This is about respect. And it is about justice. Tiana is devastated. She has been crying all night. Connor is beside himself. You embarrassed them in front of the staff at Sarah Beth's. You made them look poor. They are poor, Mother, I said bluntly. That is the reality. Pretending otherwise is what got them into this mess. And frankly, it is what got you into your mess too. Her face twisted. Do not you dare speak to me about my finances. You do not know what I have been through. I know exactly what you have been through. I shot back, losing my patience. I know about the credit cards you maxed out in my name when I was in college. I know about the second mortgage you took out on the childhood home to pay off your bingo debts. And I know why Grandma left the brownstone to me. Beatrice froze. The mention of the brownstone always had this effect on her. It was the one subject she usually avoided, because deep down she knew the truth. But today, she did not back down. Instead, she stepped closer, invading my personal space. She left that house to you because you manipulated her, she spat. You took advantage of an old woman who was losing her mind. You whispered poison in her ear about me and Tiana. You told her we were irresponsible. You coerced her into signing those papers when she did not know what day of the week it was. That is a lie, and you know it. I said, my voice trembling slightly with rage. Grandma was perfectly lucid. She sat me down in her kitchen 3 years before she died. She showed me the stack of pawnshop tickets she found in your bedroom. She knew you had pawned her wedding ring, Mother. She knew you stole her Social Security checks to play the slots in Atlantic City. Beatrice flinched, but she recovered quickly. She was confused, Beatrice insisted. She lost that ring. I never took it. I have the receipt, I said. I bought it back. I have the receipt with your signature on it. Grandma saw it. That is why she changed her will. She told the lawyer specifically that she wanted the house to go to me, because she knew if she left it to you it would be sold within a month to pay a bookie or a casino. She wanted to keep the property and the family. I am the only reason that house is still standing. You stole our inheritance, Beatrice hissed, poking a finger into my chest. That house is worth $3 million now. That is family money. Tiana deserves her share. I deserve my share. And you are sitting on it like a dragon while your sister scraps for pennies. I am preserving it, I corrected her. I pay the property taxes. I pay for the maintenance. You and Tiana have never contributed a dime. Because you stole it, she repeated like a broken record. But that ends today. She reached into her purse. For a second, I thought she was going to pull out the Bible again. But instead, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a printout from a legal website. Connor has been doing some research, she said, a smug smile spreading across her face. He knows people, Francesca, powerful people. He spoke to his family lawyers this morning. I almost laughed. Connor did not have family lawyers. Connor had debt collectors. And what did his imaginary lawyers say, I asked. They said that a will signed by a woman with early onset dementia is contestable, she said, reciting the words carefully as if she had memorized them on the ride over. They said that if one beneficiary has undue influence over the testator, the entire document can be voided. They call it elder abuse, Francesca, financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior. I stared at her. The air in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was not just a guilt trip anymore. This was a legal threat. And not just any threat. An accusation of elder abuse was a nuclear bomb for someone in my profession. I am an actuary. My entire career is built on ethics, integrity, and trust. I handle sensitive financial data for the largest corporations in the world. To hold my license, I have to pass rigorous background checks and adhere to a strict code of conduct. A formal accusation of fraud, especially involving a family member and a vulnerable senior, would trigger an immediate ethics investigation by the actuarial board. Even if I was innocent, even if I won in court, the investigation alone would suspend my license. My clients would drop me. My firm would place me on administrative leave to protect their reputation. It would effectively end my career. You would not dare, I whispered. Oh, I would, Beatrice said, her voice sweet and poisonous. And I will. Connor has the paperwork ready. He says all we have to do is file a petition with the probate court. Once it is public record, your bosses upstairs will hear about it. How will that look, Francesca, the high and mighty risk assessor accused of swindling her own grandmother? This was extortion, pure and simple. My own mother was standing in the lobby of my workplace, threatening to destroy the career I had built over 15 years unless I paid for a party. What do you want? I asked, feeling a cold sweat break out on my back. I want you to make things right, Beatrice said. I want you to apologize to your sister. I want you to write that check for the flowers. And I want you to sign a document acknowledging that Tiana owns half of the brownstone. Connor says we can structure it as a gift, so you do not have to pay taxes. See, we are trying to help you. Half the house, I repeated. You want me to give her $1.5 million in equity, just like that? It is only fair, Beatrice shrugged. She is getting married. She needs a nest egg. Connor wants to start an investment firm, and they can use the equity as collateral for a business loan. I closed my eyes. They were going to mortgage the house. They were going to take out a loan against the equity, give the money to Connor, and he was going to lose it all. The bank would foreclose. The house would be gone. Everything Grandma worked for, everything I had protected would be erased. And if I refuse, I asked, opening my eyes. Then we go to court, Beatrice said simply. And we go to the press. Tiana has a platform, you know. She will tell the world how you abused your grandmother. We will ruin you, Francesca, unless you do the right thing. I looked at the woman standing in front of me. I looked for any trace of the mother who used to braid my hair. I looked for any sign of love or hesitation. There was none. There was only greed. She was willing to burn my life to the ground to keep herself warm. I realized then that I had made a miscalculation. I had treated them like a nuisance. But they were not a nuisance. They were an existential threat. I need time, I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my insides were screaming. I cannot just sign over a house in the lobby. I need to review the paperwork. You have 24 hours, Beatrice said, checking her watch as if she had somewhere important to be. Tiana is finalizing the venue contracts tomorrow. If we do not have the money and the commitment by then, Connor files the petition. She reached out and patted my cheek. Her hand felt cold. Do not be stubborn, Francesca. We are doing this for your own good. You have been alone too long. You have forgotten how to share. We are just teaching you how to be a family again. She turned and walked toward the revolving doors, her heels clicking on the marble floor. I watched her go. I watched her walk out into the sunlight, leaving me standing in the shadows of the lobby. I turned around and walked back to the elevators. My hands were shaking so badly. I had to use 2 hands to press the button. Mike, the security guard, looked at me with concern. Is everything all right, Ms. Williams? I looked at him. No, Mike. Everything is not all right. I went back up to the 42nd floor. I walked into my office and closed the door. I sat down at my desk and stared at the file on the maritime merger. The numbers blurred. The probability tables made no sense. I was dealing with a variable I had never encountered before. A zero-sum game where the opponent was my own blood. They wanted the house, they wanted my money, and they were using my career as leverage. I picked up my phone. I needed to call Malik. But then I hesitated. Malik was in the middle of a war of his own. If I told him this, if I told him that Connor and my mother were threatening my license, he would go nuclear, he would destroy them. But in doing so, he might jeopardize his own deal. He might lose focus at a critical moment. I could not put that on him. Not yet. I had 24 hours. 24 hours to figure out how to stop them without blowing up my life. I opened a new browser window. I typed in a name. Connor Sterling. If they wanted to play legal games, I needed to know exactly who I was playing against. Beatrice said. Connor had lawyers. She said he had family money. She said he was a vice president. I started digging. I pulled up public records. I accessed the databases that only actuaries and private investigators use. The ones that show credit scores, liens, and bankruptcy filings. It took me 10 minutes to find the first crack. Connor Sterling did not have a family lawyer. In fact, Connor Sterling did not even have a bank account in good standing. I stared at the screen. A cold smile touched my lips. My mother had threatened to ruin me with a lie. But I was about to ruin them with the truth. But before I could print the documents, my email pinged. It was a message from Tiana. Subject: reconciliation. Content: Jazz. I am sorry about Mom. She is intense. But she is right. We need to fix this. Come to dinner at Connor's place tomorrow night. Just us. No yelling. Just family. We can work out a payment plan. I want you at my wedding. Please. It was the bait. The trap. They thought I was scared. They thought the threat had worked, and now they were offering me a graceful way to surrender. Come to dinner, sign the papers, and we will let you keep your career. I looked at the cursor blinking on the screen. I hit reply. I will be there. I was not going there to surrender. I was going there to gather evidence. They wanted a meeting. I would give them a meeting. But I would not be the victim they expected. I closed my laptop and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. You want to play dirty, mother? I whispered to the glass. Okay, let us play. 2 weeks of silence followed my mother's dramatic exit from my office lobby. In the world of risk assessment, silence is often more dangerous than noise. Noise gives you data points. Noise tells you where the threat is coming from and how fast it is moving. But silence is a void. It is the deep breath the ocean takes before the tsunami hits the shore. For 14 days I went to work, checked my credit reports hourly, and waited for the legal notice to drop. I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected to see a process server standing at my front door, or a headline in the industry news about an ethics investigation into my license. But there was nothing, just a heavy, suffocating quiet that made the air in my brownstone feel thin. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, the call came. It was not my mother this time. It was Tiana. I stared at her name on the screen. My finger hovered over the decline button. My brain, the logical analytical engine that had kept me safe for 35 years, screamed at me to let it go to voicemail. Do not engage. Do not open the door. But there is a part of the human heart that biology cannot explain. The part that remembers braiding her hair on the front porch when we were kids. The part that remembers protecting her from the neighborhood bullies. Even though she had grown into the bully herself, that tether was frayed but not broken. I answered the phone. Hello, Tiana. Francesca. Her voice was small. It sounded wet, like she had been crying for hours. It lacked the sharp performative edge I had seen at the restaurant. This sounded like the old Tiana, the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I am sorry, Jazz. I am so sorry. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to fill it. Mom is crazy. Tiana continued, her voice catching on a sob. She has been pushing me so hard. She wants this wedding to be perfect because she thinks it will fix everything. She thinks if I marry Connor, all our problems will go away. I got caught up in it. I let her get in my head. And I treated you like an ATM instead of my sister. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. It sounded convincing. But I analyze fraud for a living. I know that the best con artists do not sound slick. They sound vulnerable. What do you want, Tiana? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I just want my sister back, she whispered. I do not care about the flowers. I do not care about the money. Connor and I talked. We are going to scale back. We are going to do something smaller. Something we can actually afford. I raised an eyebrow. That sounded completely out of character for Connor, the man who thought $45,000 was pocket change. Really, I said. Connor agreed to that. He did, Tiana said quickly. He feels terrible about how he spoke to you. He was just stressed. You know how men get about providing. He wants to apologize too. Look, Jazz. We are having a dinner tomorrow night. Just a casual thing at the apartment. No mom, no lawyers, just me, Connor and you. Please, come. Let us just be sisters again. Please. I looked at the rain streaking down the glass of my kitchen window. My gut told me it was a trap. My gut told me that people like Tiana and Connor do not have personality transplants overnight. They do not go from threatening legal action to hosting casual dinners unless they have a new angle. Unless they have realized that the stick did not work, so now they are trying the carrot. But I needed to know what the angle was. I needed to see the battlefield. If they were planning to sue me, I needed to look Connor in the eye and see how confident he really was. I needed to see where they lived, how they lived, and what resources they actually had. I will come, I said. But if I see Mom or a lawyer, I am walking out. No lawyers, Tiana promised. Just family. 7 o'clock. I hung up the phone and immediately dialed a number I had not used in years. It belonged to a man named David, a former forensic accountant, who now worked as a private investigator specializing in asset tracing. He was the guy you called when you wanted to find the money a husband was hiding in the Cayman Islands during a divorce. David, it is Francesca Williams. I have a job for you. Name is Connor Sterling, supposedly a VP at a boutique hedge fund. I need to know everything, bank accounts, credit scores, employment history, and I need to know if he has any family money. I can have a preliminary report by Thursday, David said. I need something by tomorrow night, I said, even if it is just the basics. I am walking into a lion's den, David. I need a whip. I will see what I can do, he said. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of anxiety. David texted me at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. Digging now. It is weird, Francesca. This guy is a ghost. No property records. No SEC filings under his name. I'm going deep, but I might not have the full package until the morning. Be careful. A ghost. That was fitting. I dressed for the dinner like I was dressing for a board meeting. A sharp navy blazer, silk blouse and heels that were high enough to be authoritative but low enough to run in if necessary. I told Malik I was going to meet a client. I hated lying to him, but I could not drag him into this until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. If I brought Malik and it turned out to be a genuine apology, I would look like the aggressor. If it was a trap, I wanted to spring it myself. I took a cab to the address Tiana had sent me. It was a building in Tribeca, one of those glass needles that pierced the sky. The lobby was impressive. Floors of Italian marble, a doorman who looked like a Secret Service agent, and a scent of white tea pumped through the vents. This was serious money. For a second I doubted myself. Maybe Connor really was successful. Maybe I had misjudged him. The elevator ride to the penthouse took nearly a minute. My ears popped as we ascended. When the doors opened directly into the apartment, I stepped out into a space that was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The lights of the city twinkled below like a sea of diamonds. The living room was massive, with high ceilings and modern furniture that looked like it had been lifted straight from the pages of Architectural Digest. Tiana and Connor were waiting for me. Tiana was wearing a simple dress, looking modest and repentant. Connor was in a cashmere sweater pouring wine into a crystal decanter. Francesca, Tiana said, walking over to hug me. Thank you for coming. I let her hug me. Her body felt tense. She was vibrating with a nervous energy that she was trying hard to suppress. Hello, Tiana, I said, stepping back. Connor. Francesca. Connor nodded, offering me a glass of red wine. Reckless of me to assume you drink red, but this is a lovely Cabernet I have been saving. Please. I took the glass. I did not drink. I began to walk around the room, letting my eyes scan the environment. I put on my actuary glasses. I stopped looking at the overall picture, and started looking at the data points. The first thing I noticed was the art. On the far wall there was a massive abstract painting, splashes of red and black. It looked like a Rothko. It was framed in heavy black wood. To the untrained eye, it screamed millions of dollars. But I stepped closer. I tilted my head looking at the surface of the canvas under the track lighting. Real oil paintings have texture. You can see the brush strokes the ridges where the paint layers over itself. Even an old painting has a topography. This surface was completely flat. It was smooth. It was a print. A high-quality print, yes, perhaps canvas transfer, but it was ink, not paint. It was a poster masquerading as a masterpiece. Interesting piece, I said, turning to Connor. Is it an original? Connor chuckled, swirling his wine. Oh, that old thing. It is a study by a local artist I support. I have the Sirius collection in storage. The humidity in New York can be brutal on oils, you know. I nodded, filing that away. Lie number 1. Nobody keeps the fake art on the wall and the real art in storage unless they do not have real art. I walked toward the seating area. There was a large white rug anchoring the room. It looked plush and inviting. But as my heels sunk into it, I felt a distinct friction. Static. I looked down. The fibers had a synthetic sheen. Wool absorbs light. Silk reflects it softly. This material was reflecting the overhead lights with a harsh plastic glare. And in the corner near the sofa leg, the rug was curling slightly upward. A high-end Persian or wool rug lays heavy and flat. It has weight. This was polyester. It was a machine-made rug, likely bought from a staging company or a big box store. It was the kind of rug you buy when you want the look of luxury without the price tag. Lie number 2. Then I lifted the wine glass to my lips. I did not drink. I inhaled. Connor had made a show of pouring it from a crystal decanter hiding the bottle. He called it a lovely Cabernet. A good Cabernet has notes of blackcurrant oak, maybe a hint of tobacco. It smells deep. This smelled like sugar and rubbing alcohol. It had that sharp, stinging scent of a wine that has been mass-produced with added sulfites to preserve it on a grocery store shelf. It was $2 Chuck, dressed up in crystal. Lie number 3. I looked around the rest of the room. There were no personal photos. No books on the shelves that looked like they had been read. The coffee table books were perfectly aligned as if placed by a ruler. There was no clutter. No mail on the counter. No keys near the door. This was not a home. This was a stage set. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. They did not live here. Or if they did, they were renting it furnished, probably on a short-term lease. This was a facade built to convince me that Connor was a man of means. They were trying to dazzle me with the view so I wouldn't look at the details. But details are my business. I turned back to them. Hurned. They were watching me closely. Tiana was twisting her ring. Connor was smiling that tight shark-like smile. Beautiful place, I said, keeping my voice light. How long have you lived here? Oh, about 6 months, Connor said casually, leaning against the marble fireplace, which I noticed was clean of any soot or ash. I picked it up for a steal. The market in Tribeca was soft last year, so I grabbed it. You bought it? I asked. Cash, Connor lied effortlessly. Hate mortgages. Interest is for poor people, right? Right, I said. I took a sip of the terrible wine and forced myself to swallow. It tasted like vinegar and deceit. So I said, sitting down on the stiff sofa. Let us talk. You said you wanted to make peace. We do? Tiana said, sitting next to Connor. We want to start over. She reached for a folder on the coffee table. A folder I hadn't noticed before because it was tucked under a magazine. But before we eat, she said, her voice trembling just a little, we have a small favor to ask. Since we are scaling back the wedding, Connor has this incredible investment opportunity. It is a way for us to secure our future, so we never have to ask you for money again. Here it comes, I thought. The pivot. And since you are family, Connor added, his eyes locking onto mine. We wanted to give you the first refusal. It involves the brownstone. But, do not worry. It is not a handout. It is a partnership. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the fake art, the cheap rug, and the man wearing a watch that ticked. They were not scaling back, they were doubling down. And they had invited me into their house of cards expecting me to be too impressed to blow it down. I set my wine glass on the table. Tell me about this partnership, I said. I was ready to hear the pitch, not because I was going to buy, but because I was gathering the ammunition I would need to bury them. We sat down at the glass dining table, which was set with gold-rimmed plates that looked suspiciously like the ones sold at Pier 1 Imports during their liquidation sale. The dinner itself was a catered affair, but not from a private chef. My trained palate recognized the rubbery texture of the chicken breast, and the over-salted glaze of the asparagus. It was high-end takeout, plated to look like home cooking. I picked at my food, moving the vegetables around, while Connor held court at the head of the table. He was in full performance mode. For the first 20 minutes, he barely let Tiana or me get a word in edgewise. He wanted to impress me. He wanted to prove that despite my corporate title, he was the true financial alpha in the room. The problem was that every time he opened his mouth, he revealed just how little he actually understood about the world of finance. You know, Francesca, he said, gesturing with his fork. The market is all about sentiment right now. I have been telling my clients to leverage their positions in crypto derivatives because the fiat currency is basically crashing. It is simple economics. We are shorting the dollar against the blockchain volatility index. I chewed a piece of dry chicken, slowly trying to keep my face completely blank. Shorting the dollar against a volatility index was not simple economics. It was word salad. It was a sentence constructed by someone who had watched 3 TikTok videos on day trading, and thought he had cracked the code of Wall Street. Interesting strategy, I said, taking a sip of water to wash down the bad wine. And how are you hedging that risk? If the regulatory environment tightens, your liquidity could be trapped. Connor laughed, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Regulatory environment, he scoffed. That is old school thinking, Francesca. That is the problem with you actuaries. You are too focused on the rules. In my world, we move faster than the regulators. We operate in the gray zones. That is where the real alpha is generated. I just closed a seed round for a tech startup that uses AI to predict market corrections. We are projecting a 400% return by third quarter. 400%. I mentally rolled my eyes. Ponzi schemes promised 400%. Legitimate hedge funds fought tooth and nail for 12. Tiana was nodding along, looking at him with adoring eyes. She did not understand a word he was saying, but she loved the way he sounded saying it. She loved the buzzwords. She loved the confidence. She did not see the sweat beading on his upper lip, or the way his leg bounced nervously under the table. So, Francesca, Connor said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. About this partnership, we want to keep the brownstone in the family, obviously, but we also need to unlock its value. It is a dead asset just sitting there. Tiana and I were thinking we could set up a trust. You transfer the deed into the trust, and we manage the equity. We can pull out some cash to fund this AI venture and everyone wins. You get a passive income stream, and Tiana gets her security. I set my fork down. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to sign over my house so they could gamble the equity on a phantom startup. And if the startup fails, I asked quietly, what happens to the house then? It won't fail, Connor said, slamming his hand on the table a little too hard. That is the negative attitude holding you back, Francesca. You have to visualize success. I visualize risk, Connor, I said. That is my job. And this sounds like a high-risk exposure with zero collateral. Connor's smile faltered. The charm was beginning to wear thin, revealing the aggression underneath. He looked at Tiana and gave a barely perceptible nod. Well, he said, his voice dropping an octave, we hoped you would see the vision. We hoped you would want to help your sister voluntarily, but we prepared for the possibility that you would be difficult. Tiana stood up abruptly. I will get dessert, she said, her voice tight. She walked into the kitchen. I expected her to come back with a cake or a fruit tart. Instead, I heard the distinct click of the front door unlocking. I turned in my chair. The front door opened, and 3 men walked in. They were not the sleek, high-powered corporate attorneys I dealt with at my firm. These men looked like they hunted ambulances for sport. Their suits were ill-fitting, their ties were too wide, and they carried the scent of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The man in the lead was older, with slick-back gray hair and a face that looked like it had been eroded by years of ethical compromises. He was carrying a thick, expandable file folder. Who are these people? I asked, standing up. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was an ambush. Sit down, Francesca, Connor said, remaining seated. He picked up his wine glass, looking relaxed for the first time all evening. I did not sit. I took a step back toward the window, my instincts screaming at me to find an exit. These are my associates, Connor said, gesturing to the men. Mr. Henderson and his team. They have been helping us review the discrepancies in Grandma Williams' estate. Mr. Henderson stepped forward and dropped the file onto the glass dining table. It landed with a heavy thud that rattled the silverware. The sound echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. Ms. Williams, Henderson said, his voice raspy and unpleasant. We have drafted a civil complaint regarding the disposition of the property located at 412 Decatur Street. We have also prepared a formal petition to the probate court to reopen your grandmother's estate, based on new evidence. What evidence? I demanded, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Evidence of undue influence and elder abuse, Henderson said smoothly. We have sworn affidavits from family members stating that you isolated the deceased in her final years, that you restricted access to her children and grandchildren, that you coerced a woman suffering from cognitive decline into changing her will to your sole benefit. That is a lie, I said, looking at Tiana, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, refusing to meet my eyes. Tiana, tell them it is a lie. You never visited Grandma. You were too busy partying in Miami. I begged you to come see her. Tiana looked at the floor, picking at a loose thread on her dress. I remember it differently, Jazz, she whispered. I remember you telling me not to come. I remember you controlling everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. She was rewriting history. She was gaslighting me in real time. Connor stood up now and walked over to the table. He opened the file. Inside was a stack of legal documents thick enough to choke a horse. Here is the situation, Francesca, Connor said, tapping the paper with his finger. We can file this tomorrow morning. Once we do, it becomes public record. Elder abuse. Fraud. Coercion. Ugly words. Especially for someone with your professional standing. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. I did some reading on the Actuarial Board of Standards, he continued. They are very strict about ethics, aren't they? Integrity is the bedrock of the profession, blah blah blah. I wonder what happens when a senior partner is accused of swindling her own senile grandmother. I froze. He had found the pressure point. I imagine Connor went on, enjoying every syllable. That your firm has a policy about this. Pending investigations usually means suspension, right? And even if you win in court, which will take years, the stain never really goes away. Who trusts a risk assessor who exploits the elderly? I looked at the documents. The top page was a draft complaint to the Actuarial Board. It was already filled out. All it needed was a signature. This is blackmail, I whispered. Connor shrugged. Call it what you want. I call it a settlement negotiation. He slid a single piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a quit-claim deed. Sign this, he said. It transfers 50% of the brownstone to Tiana effective immediately. We will structure it as a gift. You keep your half. You keep living there. We just take our equity out via a loan. You keep your license, you keep your job, and the family stays happy. And if I do not sign, I ask, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. Then Mr. Henderson files the papers at 9 a.m. Connor said, checking his watch. And by noon, I make a phone call to the ethics compliance officer at your firm. I have the number right here. I looked at the three lawyers standing like vultures in the living room. I looked at Tiana cowering in the kitchen. I looked at Connor smug and victorious in his rented penthouse. I was trapped. If I fought them, they would destroy my reputation before I ever stepped foot in a courtroom. In my industry, reputation is everything. A scandal like this, even a false one, would make me radioactive. I would lose my clients. I would lose my partnership. I would lose the career I had spent 15 years building. But if I signed, I was handing over my grandmother's legacy to a con artist. I was letting them loot the home I had saved. I felt the walls closing in. The air in the penthouse felt thin and toxic. I needed time. I needed to think. But Connor was not giving me time. He was holding out a pen. Tick-tock, Francesca, he said, mocking the sound of a clock. Decisions, decisions. I looked at the pen. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint, fitting for a cheap plastic man. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I needed to stall. I needed to get out of this room. I need to read it, I said, reaching for the document. I am not signing anything without reading the fine print. Go ahead, Connor said, sitting back down and crossing his legs. We have all night. But nobody leaves until that paper is signed. I picked up the document. The legal jargon swam before my eyes. Grantor. Grantee. Consideration of $1. I was alone. My high-powered job meant nothing here. My money meant nothing here. I was just a woman surrounded by 4 men who wanted to strip me bare. I reached into my purse. What are you doing? Henderson barked, stepping forward. I am getting my reading glasses, I lied. My hand closed around my phone. I pulled it out and placed it on the table, screen down. I am just going to read, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I looked at Connor. You think you have won, don't you? I think I am just leveling the playing field. Connor smiled. You have had the advantage for too long, Francesca. It is time for a correction. I looked down at the document again. But my mind was racing. I needed a variable I hadn't calculated. I needed an outlier event. And then I remembered. I hadn't come alone. I mean, I had walked in alone. But I had a failsafe. A protocol I had established with Malik years ago when we first started navigating the dangerous waters of high finance. A panic button. 3 taps on the screen. I rested my hand on my phone. 1, 2, 3. I looked up at Connor. You are right, I said. This is a correction. But I do not think you understand who is about to be corrected. Connor's smile faltered slightly. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, leaning back in my chair. I am not the only one with a team. Before he could answer, my phone lit up. A single text message. ETA 2 minutes. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had smiled all night. Read the contract, Francesca Connor snapped, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Stop stalling. I am not stalling, Connor, I said. I am waiting for the cavalry. What cavalry? Tiana asked, stepping out of the kitchen, her voice high and frightened. You will see, I said. I picked up the quitclaim deed and ripped it in half. Connor jumped to his feet. You stupid bitch, he shouted. You just ended your career. Henderson filed the papers. Henderson reached for his phone. But he never got to dial. Because at that exact moment, the elevator door slid open with a soft chime. We all turned. Standing in the elevator car was not a delivery guy. It was not a neighbor. It was my husband. And he didn't look like the Malik they knew. He didn't look like the quiet guy in the hoodie. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than Connor's car. His eyes were cold, his jaw was set, and behind him stood two men who made Henderson's team look like Boy Scouts. Malik stepped into the room. The energy shifted instantly. The air practically crackled. Connor stammered, taking a step back. How did you get up here? The doorman owns the building, Malik said, his voice calm and deep. Or rather, my holding company does. We closed the deal this morning. He walked past Connor as if he didn't exist and came to stand beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. A heavy, comforting weight. Are you okay, Jazz? He asked, not looking at the lawyers yet. I am now, I said. Malik turned his gaze to Henderson. The older lawyer swallowed hard, dropping his eyes to the floor. Henderson, Malik said, I believe you are holding a file that belongs to the trash can. Who are you? Henderson squeaked, clutching the file to his chest. Malik smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I am the guy who is about to make you very famous at the Bar Association, he said. Unless you start walking toward that elevator right now. The room was silent. The standoff had begun. And for the first time all night I wasn't the one sweating. I looked down at the screen of my phone where the blue bubble had just appeared, confirming that my message had been delivered. 3 simple words. Showtime. Come up. It was not a distress signal. It was an activation code. For years Malik and I had kept our professional lives separate from my family, not because we were ashamed, but because we knew exactly what would happen if people like Tiana and Connor knew the truth. They would not see hard work or late nights, or the crushing pressure of corporate law. They would just see a bank vault with a human face. We had protected our peace by wearing hoodies and driving a modest sedan to family barbecues. We had played the role of the boring middle-class couple perfectly. But sitting in that rented penthouse surrounded by men who looked at me like I was prey, I realized that the time for disguises was over. I placed the phone face down on the cold glass table and looked up at Connor. He was still standing over me, smugness radiating off him like heat. He saw the phone in my hand and let out a short, sharp laugh. Who are you texting, Francesca? He asked, shaking his head with mock pity. Please tell me you are not calling that husband of yours. What is he going to do? Come over here and fix the Wi-Fi. Or maybe he can unclog the toilet while he is at it, since that is about the only thing he is qualified for. Tiana giggled nervously from the kitchen doorway. She was holding a glass of water, her knuckles white against the glass. He is just going to embarrass you, Jazz, she said, her voice trembling. Connor is a businessman. Malik is Malik. Do not bring him into this. He does not understand this world. I looked at my sister. She truly believed it. She believed that the man in the polyester suit standing next to her was a king, and the man I went home to every night was a peasant. It was almost tragic. He understands more than you think? I said, my voice steady and calm. Connor sneered. I am sure he does. Maybe I will give him a tip if he gets here fast enough. I have a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. The 3 lawyers chuckled. It was a nasty sound. A sound of men who thought they held all the cards. Henderson, the older lawyer with the slicked back hair, leaned forward. Ms. Williams, we are losing patience. Your husband cannot help you here. This is a legal matter, not a domestic dispute. Unless he is bringing a check for $1.5 million, I suggest you pick up that pen and sign the deed. You are running out of options. I did not pick up the pen. I picked up my wine glass and swirled the cheap liquid, looking at the way it stained the crystal. I am not running out of options, Mr. Henderson, I said softly. I am just waiting for the upgrade. Connor opened his mouth to make another insult, but the words died in his throat. A soft, melodious chime echoed through the penthouse. It was the sound of the private elevator arriving. The light above the brushed steel doors turned from red to green. Everyone froze. In a building like this you could not just come up. You needed a keycard. You needed biometric clearance. Or you needed to own the building. The door slid open with a whisper. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. It became heavier, charged with a sudden overwhelming static. Standing in the center of the elevator car was Malik. But it was not the Malik my family knew. It was not the man in the faded jeans and the comfortable sneakers. This was Malik Johnson. He was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit that fit him with the kind of geometric precision that only Italian tailors can achieve. It was a Tom Ford custom cut that screamed power not through flashiness but through perfection. The fabric absorbed the light, making him look like a shadow that had taken human form. His shirt was crisp white against his dark skin, and his silk tie was a deep blood red. On his wrist, instead of his usual Apple Watch, sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus that cost more than this entire apartment rental. But it was not the clothes that made Connor take a step back. It was the eyes. Malik stepped out of the elevator. He did not rush. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owns the ground he walks on. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. Behind him, two other men stepped out. They were younger, sharper, and carried matching crocodile skin briefcases. They flanked Malik like wolves flanking the pack leader. They did not look like lawyers. They looked like executioners in bespoke suits. Connor blinked his mouth, opening and closing like a fish out of water. Who let you up here? He stammered, his voice losing all of its previous bravado. The doorman is supposed to call. This is private property. Malik did not even look at him. He walked past Connor as if he were a piece of furniture, a minor inconvenience in the layout of the room. He walked straight to where I was sitting. He stopped beside my chair and placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was warm and solid. It was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice low and rumbling. I shook my head. No, just annoyed. Malik nodded. He turned slowly, pivoting on his heel to face the room. His gaze swept over Tiana, who shrank back against the refrigerator. It swept over the fake art on the walls. It swept over the cheap rug. And finally it landed on the three lawyers sitting at the dining table. The effect was instantaneous. Mr. Henderson, the man who had been barking threats at me just 30 seconds ago, went pale. His skin turned the color of old ash. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. Sweat broke out on his forehead, visible even under the dim mood lighting. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the files, began to shake uncontrollably. Mr. Johnson, Henderson stuttered. His voice was a squeak, a pathetic sound that barely registered. Malik tilted his head slightly, studying the man with clinical disinterest. Henderson, he said. The name rolled off his tongue like a judgment. I did not know you were taking freelance work. I thought the partners at Davis and Steinberg kept you on a shorter leash, especially after that malpractice settlement last year. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. He fumbled with his tie, loosening it, as if he were suddenly suffocating. First, I am just consulting, sir, he stammered. Just offering some advice to a family friend. I did not know. I had no idea Mrs. Williams that she was with you. Connor looked from Henderson to Malik, his confusion turning into panic. Henderson, what are you doing? Connor demanded, trying to regain control. Why are you standing up? Sit down. This is just her husband. He is a nobody. Henderson looked at Connor with pure horror. Shut up, you idiot, Henderson hissed. That is Malik Johnson. He is a senior partner at Sterling & Cooper. He is the head of the Mergers and Acquisitions division. The room went dead silent. Sterling & Cooper. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. It was one of the top 3 law firms in New York City, a firm that did not deal with divorces or traffic tickets. They dealt with governments. They dealt with Fortune 500 conglomerates. They were the legal equivalent of a nuclear superpower. Connor's face crumbled. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind a terrified boy in a rented sweater. Sterling, he whispered. But that is my last name. Malik finally looked at him. He looked at Connor with a mixture of amusement and disgust. Sterling is a common name, Malik said calmly. But there is a difference, Connor. You use the name to get tables at restaurants. I use the name to buy the restaurants. Malik gestured to one of his associates. The young man stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the table right on top of Henderson's messy pile of papers. He clicked the latches open. The sound was sharp and precise. He pulled out a single red folder. Malik took the folder and opened it. You threatened my wife, Malik said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any scream. You threatened her career. You threatened her reputation. You brought these bottom feeders into a home you do not own to extort a woman who has done nothing but support this ungrateful family. He pulled out a document and slid it across the table toward Henderson. That is a formal complaint to the State Bar Association, Malik said. It details your attempt to use a fraudulent legal threat to coerce a signature on a property deed. It also lists the 3 ethics violations you have committed in the last 20 minutes. My assistant is standing by to file it electronically. All I have to do is say the word. Henderson began to hyperventilate. Please, Mr. Johnson. Please. I did not know. I was misled. This man. He pointed a shaking finger at Connor. He told me it was a standard dispute. He told me the grandmother was mentally incompetent. I was just following instructions. You did not do your due diligence, Henderson Malik said, cold as ice. And in my world, that is a fatal error. Malik turned his eyes to the other 2 lawyers. And you too? He said. I recognize you from the courthouse cafeteria. Unless you want your names added to this filing, I suggest you pack up your briefcases and get out of my sight. You have exactly 10 seconds before I ruin your career so thoroughly you will not be able to get a job as a paralegal in a strip mall. The 2 younger lawyers did not hesitate. They grabbed their bags, shoving papers in haphazardly. They did not look at Connor. They did not look at Henderson. They scrambled for the elevator button, pressing it repeatedly in panic. But Henderson was frozen. He looked at the document in front of him, then at Malik. First, I can fix this, he whispered. I can withdraw the petition. We never filed it. It was just a draft. It was a weapon, Malik corrected him. You pointed a loaded gun at my wife. You do not get to put it back in the holster and say, just kidding. Malik leaned in close, his hands resting on the table. Get out, he said. Henderson grabbed his things. He ran toward the elevator, pushing past his colleagues. The doors opened, and the 3 of them piled in, terrified to look back. The doors slid shut, and the silence they left behind was deafening. Now, it was just us. Me, Malik, his 2 associates, and Connor, and Tiana. Connor was backing away slowly until his legs hit the sofa. He collapsed onto it looking small and broken. Tiana was weeping silently in the corner, her hands covering her mouth. Malik adjusted his cuffs. He looked at Connor. Now that the garbage has been taken out, he said, his voice returning to that calm, terrifying baritone. Let us talk about who you really are, Connor. Because while my wife was being polite and eating your terrible chicken, my team was running a forensic audit on your entire life. One of the associates handed Malik another file. And let me tell you, Malik said, flipping it open. It is a very interesting read. The air in the penthouse had shifted from the stale scent of cheap wine and desperation, to the ozone charge of an impending storm. Henderson stood there with his hand extended, a sweaty palm offering a truce that did not exist. He looked like a man who had just realized he was trying to sell flood insurance to Noah. He kept his hand out for a second too long, his smile faltering into a rictus of pure terror, as Malik simply looked at it. Malik did not frown. He did not sneer. He looked at Henderson's hand with the same clinical detachment one might use to examine a petri dish, containing a mildly interesting but ultimately repulsive bacteria. He did not break stride. He did not acknowledge the gesture. He simply walked past Henderson as if the man were a coat rack, leaving the lawyer standing there with his arm hanging in the empty air, a monument to his own irrelevance. Malik moved to the head of the table where Connor had been holding court just moments before. Connor scrambled out of the way, tripping over his own feet to vacate the space. My husband placed his briefcase on the glass surface. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the table was soft but authoritative. He did not sit down. He stood looming over the scattered documents, his shadow stretching long across the room. He reached out and picked up the quitclaim deed, the document that they had tried to force me to sign. The paper looked fragile in his large hands. He held it up to the light, adjusting his cuffs with a slow, deliberate movement that drew every eye in the room. Standard boilerplate language, Malik said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. Grantor acknowledges receipt of $1. Grantor waives all future claims. He chuckled softly, a dry, humorless sound that was more terrifying than a shout. You know, Henderson, I have seen better legal drafting from first-year law students who are hung over on a Tuesday morning. This is not just predatory. It is lazy. Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Mr. Johnson, if I could just explain. We were under the impression that this was a mutual agreement. A family matter. We were just facilitating the paperwork. Facilitating. Malik repeated the word, tasting it. Is that what they call extortion these days? Facilitating. He looked at the paper one last time. Then with a sudden violent motion, he ripped it down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper was shocking in the silent room. It sounded like a bone snapping. He put the two halves together and ripped them again. And again. And again. He did not stop until the document that was supposed to steal my inheritance was nothing more than confetti snowing down onto the glass table. That, Malik said, brushing a speck of paper dust from his impeccable suit jacket, is my legal opinion on your offer. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward, getting into Henderson's personal space. The older lawyer recoiled, the smell of his fear practically radiating off him. Now let us talk about your future, Henderson, Malik said. Because right now it is looking very bleak. You are standing in a private residence attempting to coerce a signature from a woman under duress. You have threatened her professional license, based on a fraudulent claim of elder abuse. And you have done all of this while representing a client who has no legal standing in this property. I was not. Henderson stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. You or Malik cut him off, his voice sharpening like a blade. I know exactly what you were doing. You were banking on the fact that she was a woman alone. You were banking on her being scared. You were banking on her not knowing the law. But you made a fatal miscalculation. You forgot to check who she goes to bed with. Malik reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up, the screen dark. I have the number for the head of the State Bar Association on speed dial, Malik said. We play golf on Sundays. If I press this button and tell him that one of his members is currently engaged in a conspiracy to commit real estate fraud against the wife of a Sterling and Cooper partner, do you know what happens? Henderson shook his head, his eyes wide and watery. An emergency suspension of your license by morning, Malik answered. A full ethics investigation by noon. And by the end of the week you will be lucky if you are allowed to notarize a library card, let alone practice law in the state of New York. And that is just the professional consequence. Then comes the criminal referral for attempted grand larceny. Criminal, Henderson squeaked. Extortion is a felony, Henderson, Malik said. And I have 3 witnesses standing right here, including 2 associates who have already documented every word you said tonight. Malik turned his gaze to the 2 younger lawyers who were cowering near the elevator. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. They were young, probably just a few years out of law school, hungry for a quick payday, and too inexperienced to know when to run. But they were learning fast. And you too, Malik said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow even more menacing. I assume you are just the bagmen. The grunts carrying the water for this operation. You have a choice. You can stay here and go down with the ship. You can have your names attached to the ethics complaint I'm about to file. You can explain to your student loan lenders why you can no longer work in the legal profession. Or, he pointed a finger at the elevator doors. You can leave. Right now. And if you run fast enough, maybe I will forget your faces. The effect was instantaneous. The 2 associates did not look at Henderson. They did not look at Connor. They did not even look at each other. Survival instinct took over completely. One of them grabbed his briefcase so fast he knocked over a vase on the console table. It shattered, but he did not stop. Sorry. So sorry. Big mistake. We are leaving. We are gone. They scrambled toward the elevator, hitting the call button repeatedly, as if pressing it harder would make the car arrive faster. When the doors slid open, they practically fell inside, tripping over each other in their haste to escape the gravity of Malik's anger. Henderson watched them go, his mouth hanging open. He looked back at Malik. He looked at the confetti on the table. He looked at Connor, who was sitting on the sofa with his head in his hands. Mr. Johnson, please, Henderson whispered. I have a family. I have a pension. Do not ruin me over this. Then get out of my sight, Malik roared. The sound of his voice filled the room, shaking the windows. It was a release of the anger he had been holding back for my sake. It was the roar of a protector who had seen his family threatened. Henderson flinched violently. He grabbed his briefcase, his hands shaking so badly he could barely close the latch. He did not say another word. He did not look at me. He turned and ran for the elevator, squeezing through the doors just as they were starting to close. And then, they were gone. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The energy in the room had shifted completely. The threat was gone. The legal leverage was gone. The three men who were supposed to be Connor's army had fled the battlefield, leaving him exposed and defenseless. Malik took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. He picked up the file folder Henderson had left behind and tossed it into the trash can near the kitchen. Then he walked over to me. He took my hand and squeezed it. His skin was warm, his pulse was steady. "Are you all right, Jazz?" he asked quietly. I nodded, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I am fine. Better than fine." Malik turned slowly to face the sofa. Connor was sitting there looking small. He was still holding his wine glass, but his hand was resting on his knee, and the wine was sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He looked up at Malik, and for the first time I saw the true Connor Sterling. Not the arrogant investor, not the confident fiancé, but a con man who had just realized his con was over. He looked at the elevator doors where his lawyers had disappeared. Then he looked at Tiana, who was still frozen in the kitchen doorway. And finally he looked at Malik. "You cannot do that," Connor said, his voice cracking. "You cannot just threaten my legal team. That is intimidation." Malik laughed. He walked over to the sofa and stood over Connor, looking down at him with pity. "That was not intimidation, Connor. That was professional courtesy. I gave them a chance to save themselves. Something you clearly did not do." "What is that supposed to mean?" Connor snapped, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "It means," Malik said, signaling to one of his associates who stepped forward with a fresh file, "that you are all alone. My team ran a full background check on you while we were in the car. And Connor, it is embarrassing." Malik took the file and dropped it onto Connor's lap. "We know about the gambling debts," Malik said, ticking the points off on his fingers. "We know about the eviction notices from your last 3 apartments. We know that you were fired from that insurance sales job 6 months ago for padding your commission reports. And we know that the Sterling family in Connecticut, the real Sterlings, have a restraining order against you because you stole your grandmother's jewelry to pay a bookie." Tiana gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "That is not true. He talks to his grandmother every Sunday." "He talks to a dial tone," Tiana, Malik said without looking at her. "Or maybe he talks to you pretending it is her. But the real Mrs. Sterling wants nothing to do with him." Connor stared at the file in his lap. He did not open it. He knew what was inside. He knew that the facade he had built so carefully, the house of cards he had constructed to trap my sister and steal my money, had just been blown down by the big bad wolf. And looking at Malik standing there, in his $5,000 suit, with the city lights framing him like a halo, I realized something. My husband wasn't the wolf. He was the hurricane. And Connor was just a piece of debris about to be swept away. The silence in the penthouse was no longer the silence of intimidation, it was the silence of a tomb. The 3 lawyers had fled, taking their cheap suits and their empty threats with them, leaving behind a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Malik stood by the table, his hand resting on the red file folder he had brought with him. It was not a thick file, it did not need to be. Sometimes the truth is a bullet, and you only need one to kill a lie. He looked at me, and gave a small nod, a silent permission to finish what we had started. I stepped forward, my heels clicking on the floor that I now knew was covered in a cheap polyester rug. I reached out and picked up the red folder. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the paper inside, but because of the weight of the destruction it was about to unleash. I looked at Connor. He was slumped on the sofa, the glass of wine still clutched in his hand as if it were a life preserver. His face was a mask of pale sweat. He knew what was in this folder. He had spent years running from the information contained inside these pages, and now it finally caught up to him in a high-rise above Manhattan. I flipped the folder open. The first page was a summary of a private investigator report dated yesterday. It was thorough, brutal, and verified. I looked at my mother, who was sitting in the corner, looking stunned but not yet defeated. I looked at Tiana, who was staring at Connor, waiting for him to tell her it was all a mistake. "You wanted to talk about family legacy, Connor," I said, my voice echoing in the large room. "You wanted to lecture me about the Sterling name. Let us talk about that name." I pulled out the first document and laid it on the glass table, smoothing it out so everyone could see. "This is a legal affidavit from the Sterling Family Trust," I read aloud. "It is dated 5 years ago. It states that Connor James Sterling is formally removed as a beneficiary due to theft, fraud, and conduct unbecoming of the family reputation. It is signed by your grandfather." I looked up at him. "You are not the heir to a fortune, Connor. You are an outcast. Your family paid you a lump sum of $50,000 to change your last name and leave Connecticut. You took the money, but you kept the name because it was the only thing you had left to trade on. Connor flinched. That is out of context. He stammered, his voice weak. We had a disagreement about investment strategies. My grandfather is old school. He did not understand the modern market. He understood that you stole his wife's jewelry. I corrected him, pulling out the second sheet. This was a police report. Larceny in the second degree. You pawned a diamond tennis bracelet and a vintage Cartier watch, I said, reading the itemized list. You told the police it was an inside job by the housekeeper. You let an innocent woman get fired and questioned by detectives before your grandmother found the pawn tickets in your jacket pocket. They didn't press charges because they didn't want the scandal, but they cut you off. You haven't spoken to a real Sterling since 2019. Tiana made a small whimpering sound. She looked at Connor, her eyes wide and pleading. Connor, tell her she is lying. Tell her you talk to your grandmother every Sunday. Connor wouldn't look at her. He stared into his wineglass, swirling the red liquid faster and faster. He talks to a dial tone. Tiana, I said. Or maybe he calls a service, but he is not calling Greenwich, Connecticut. I turned the page. But let us talk about your own financial genius, I continued. You claimed $45,000 was pocket change. You claimed you manage a hedge fund. I pulled out a credit report. It was a sea of red ink. Your credit score is 420, I said. You have 3 active judgments against you from creditors in New Jersey and Florida. And this, I tapped a highlighted figure in the center of the page. This is impressive, Connor. You owe $500,000, not to a bank, not to a credit card company, but to a private lending entity based in Atlantic City. I looked at him. That is gambling debt, isn't it? Online poker, sports betting. You didn't lose this money investing in startups. You lost it betting on horses and point spreads. Connor slammed his glass down on the coffee table so hard, wine sloshed over the rim, staining the rental furniture. You accessed my private financial data without my consent, he shouted, trying to muster some anger. That is illegal. I will sue you. We are way past suing, Connor. Malik spoke up from behind me, his voice calm and deadly. And for the record, private investigators are perfectly legal when they are uncovering fraud committed against a client. And right now, you are trying to defraud my wife. I flipped to the next page. This one was a rental agreement. You told me you bought this penthouse with cash, I said. You told Tiana this was your marital home. But this is a short-term corporate lease, Connor. It is in the name of a shell company. And the rent is $25,000 a month. I looked at the payment history. You paid the first month, and the security deposit. You haven't paid anything since. You are 3 months behind. The eviction notice was filed yesterday. The only reason you are still here is because the courts are backed up. But the marshals are coming, Connor. Probably next week. I dropped the page onto the pile. So here is the reality, I said, turning to Tiana, who looked like she was going to be sick. He does not have a job. He does not have a trust fund. He is drowning in $500,000 of gambling debt, and he is about to be homeless. That is why he needs the brownstone. Tiana. I walked over to my sister. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to wake her up. He does not want to marry you because he loves you. He does not even want the house to live in. He needs the equity. He was going to make me sign the deed. Then he was going to take a hard money loan against the property using predatory lenders who do not ask questions. He was going to take that cash, pay off his bookies in Atlantic City, and leave you with the debt. I took a breath, letting the horror of it sink in. He was going to bank our piteous Tiana. He was going to take Grandma's house, the only thing of value this family has left, and he was going to feed it to a slot machine. And when the bank came to foreclose, he would have been long gone. I looked at Connor, who was now chewing on his fingernail, his leg bouncing nervously. Am I wrong, Connor? I asked. Tell me I am wrong. Show me one bank statement. Show me one pay stub. Show me anything that proves you are not a parasite looking for a host. Connor didn't speak. He couldn't. The truth was sitting on the glass table in black and white, and there was nowhere left to hide. I looked at my mother. Beatrice was staring at the documents, her mouth slightly open. For the first time in her life she was speechless. She had pushed me to give money to this man, she had threatened to ruin my career to satisfy his greed, and now she was looking at the wreckage of her own ambition. But I knew my family. I knew that denial was a powerful drug, and I knew that admitting I was right was more painful to them than being robbed by a stranger. Tiana stood up slowly. She walked over to the table and looked down at the documents. Her hands were shaking. She picked up the affidavit from the Sterling family. She read it. Then she picked up the credit report. She read the number. $500,000. She stood there for a long time. The silence stretched out thin and brittle. I thought she was going to cry. I thought she was going to scream at Connor. I thought she was going to thank me for saving her from a life of ruin. But Tiana did not do any of those things. She dropped the paper. She looked at me. And her eyes were not filled with gratitude. They were filled with hate. "You faked this," she whispered. I blinked. "What? You faked this," Tiana said louder this time. "You and your husband. You printed these out on your computer. You made it all up because you are jealous." "Tiana," I said, stepping forward. "Look at the seals. Look at the notarized signatures. This is real." "No," she screamed, backing away from me. "It is not real. Connor loves me. He is a vice president. We are going to get married at the plaza. You just want to ruin it. You have always wanted to ruin everything for me because you are miserable." She looked at Connor, desperate for him to validate her delusion. "Tell her, Connor," she begged. "Tell her she is lying. Tell her about the investment. Tell her about the house in the Hamptons." Connor saw his opening. He saw that Tiana was so desperate to believe the lie that she would reject the evidence of her own eyes. He sat up straighter. He fixed his tie. "She is lying, baby," Connor said, his voice gaining strength. "They hacked my accounts and altered the numbers. It is a setup. They are trying to frame me because they do not want us to be together. They are classist, Tiana. They think they are better than us." Tiana turned back to me, her face twisting into a snarl. "You are evil," she spat. "You come into our home. You insult my fiancé. You bring these fake papers. You are a monster, Francesca." I stared at her. I looked at a woman who was standing on the edge of a cliff. And when I offered her a hand, she chose to jump because she didn't like the way I looked at her. "Tiana, he is using you," I said, my voice breaking. "He is going to leave you with nothing. He treats me like a princess," she screamed. "He buys me things. He takes me to nice places. What do? You judge me. You hoard your money. You think you are the queen of the world just because you can do math." She lunged at me. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. Her hand came up palm open, aiming for my face. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to slap the truth out of existence. But her hand never connected. Malik moved with a speed that defied his size. He caught Tiana's wrist inches from my cheek. He didn't squeeze. He didn't twist. He just held it there, an immovable wall of force. "Do not," Malik said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that froze the room. "Do not ever raise your hand to my wife again." He released her wrist, pushing it gently but firmly away. Tiana stumbled back, gasping as if she had been burned. She rubbed her wrist, looking at Malik with fear. "He hurt me," she wailed, turning to our mother. "Mom, he hurt me." Beatrice, who had been silent, finally stood up. She walked over to Tiana and wrapped an arm around her, glaring at Malik and me. "You come into this house, you threaten us, and now you assault your sister." "Beatrice," said her voice trembling with indignation. "I have never been so ashamed in my life." "You are ashamed?" I asked incredulously. "Mother, look at the table. Look at the proof. That man is a con artist. He was going to steal the brownstone. He was going to steal your inheritance too. So what if he has debts?" Beatrice shouted, shocking me into silence. "So what if he has made mistakes? He is a man, Francesca. Men take risks. Sometimes they lose. That is why they need support. That is why they need family." She gestured to Connor, who was now playing the victim perfectly, looking down at the floor with a tragic expression. "He is trying to build something," she continued. "He is trying to give Tiana a good life. Maybe he stretched the truth a little. Maybe he borrowed some money. Who hasn't? Your father borrowed money. I borrowed money. It is what people do to survive." "He owes $500,000 to loan sharks, mother," I said. "That is not borrowing. That is a death sentence. And you have millions," Beatrice shot back, pointing a finger at me. "You have millions sitting in the bank doing nothing. You could write a check today and clear his debt. You could give them the house and let them start over. But you won't. Because you are greedy." I stared at her. The room seemed to spin slightly. You want me to pay his gambling debt, I whispered. You want me to give my house to a man who just tried to blackmail me so he can gamble it away. It is family money, Beatrice said. It belongs to all of us. If you were a good Christian, if you were a good sister, you would help him. You would forgive him. You would use your blessing to help Tiana. But you are not a good sister. You are a cold, heartless woman. She hugged Tiana tighter. We do not need your proof, she said. We do not need your judgment. We are going to go forward with this wedding. We are going to find a way. Connor is a smart man. He will figure it out. And when he is back on top, when he is rich again, do not come crawling back to us. I looked at them, the three of them. A trinity of delusion. Tiana, the golden child, who would rather be lied to than face reality. Beatrice, the enabler, who would burn her own daughter to save face. And Connor, the parasite, who had found the perfect host. They were not victims. They were volunteers. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling of a heavy chain finally snapping. The burden I had carried for 35 years. The obligation to save them, the need for their approval. It all just fell away. I looked at Malik. He was watching me, waiting for my signal. He was ready to fight for me. But he knew this was a battle only I could end. I took a deep breath. The air in the penthouse still smelled like cheap wine and lies, but for the first time I could breathe clearly. You are right, Mother, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I am a cold woman. I calculate risk. And I have just calculated that you are a total loss. I picked up the red folder from the table. I closed it. You want to do this your way, I said. You want to ignore the facts. You want to pretend he is a prince and I am the villain. Fine. I turned to Malik. Give me the phone, I said. Malik reached into his pocket and handed me his phone. It was unlocked. Who are you calling? Tiana asked, wiping her eyes. The police. Go ahead. Tell them we are happy. I am not calling the police, I said, tapping the screen. I am calling the building management. Connor froze. Why? Because I said, looking him dead in the eye while my thumb hovered over the call button. I told you earlier that my husband's company bought this building this morning. But I forgot to mention one detail. I smiled, and it was the coldest smile I had ever worn. I am the managing partner of the real estate trust that holds the deed, which means Connor. I am your landlord. I pressed the call button. And I have a strict policy against tenants who are 3 months behind on rent. I put the phone to my ear. Hello, security? I said, my voice ringing through the silent apartment. This is Francesca Williams. I am in penthouse B. I have a squatter on the premises. Yes, he is refusing to vacate. Please send a team up immediately and bring the eviction notice. I lowered the phone and looked at the three of them. You have 30 minutes to pack, I said. Or you can leave with nothing but the lies on your backs. This was the nuclear option. And I had just pushed the button. The silence that followed my announcement was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb detonates, but before the dust settles. Connor stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Tiana looked at the phone in my hand, as if it were a loaded weapon. Beatrice was the first to find her voice, and predictably, it was screeching with indignation. You cannot evict us, she shouted, stepping forward with her chest heaved. This is a private residence. We have rights. You cannot just walk in here and throw people out on the street because you are having a tantrum. I'm not having a tantrum, Mother, I said calmly, placing the phone back on the table. I am enforcing a contract. Malik stepped forward then. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city lights. Actually, Beatrice, he said without turning around. We can. You see, when my firm acquired the distressed assets of the holding company that owns this building this morning, we inherited all the active leases. And do you know what we found when we audited the tenant files for Penthouse B? He turned slowly, fixing Connor with a look of amusement. We found a lease agreement signed by a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, a corporation that has no assets, no directors, and most importantly no payment history for the last 90 days. Connor went pale. That is, there was a wire transfer error. I told the management company. My bank is investigating. Your bank isn't investigating anything, Connor, Malik said, cutting him off. Because you do not have a bank. We checked. The account number you provided on the lease application belongs to a defunct savings and loan that went under in 2008. You have been squatting here, Connor. You paid the deposit with cash you probably borrowed from a loan shark, and you have been dodging the landlord ever since. Malik walked over to the table and picked up the piece of paper I had placed there earlier. The one I had pulled from my purse along with the red file. This is a notice to vacate, Malik said, sliding it across the glass toward Connor. Under New York state law, when a commercial lease held by a corporate entity is in default, and there is evidence of fraud, the new owner has the right to immediate possession. We do not need a court order, Connor. We just need to change the locks. Connor stared at the paper. It was real. It had the seal of Sterling and Cooper on the letterhead. It was the end of his fantasy. You are lying, Tiana screamed. She rushed over to Connor, grabbing his arm, shaking him. Tell them they are lying, Connor. Tell them you own this place. Show them the deed. Connor pushed her away. Get off me, he snapped, his voice raw with panic. Tiana stumbled back, looking at him with horror. Connor, he is not going to show you a deed, Tiana. I said, my voice soft but firm. Because there isn't one. The only thing he owns in this apartment is the cheap suit on his back and the lies he has been feeding you. I looked at my watch. You have 28 minutes left, I said. I suggest you start packing. The security team I just called is very efficient. They will remove anything left in the unit after the deadline. And I mean anything. Beatrice looked around the room, her eyes darting from the fake art on the walls to the expensive-looking furniture. But where will we go? She stammered. It is raining. We cannot just go out on the street. Francesca, you cannot do this to your own mother. I can, I said. And I am. You wanted to live in luxury, mother. You wanted the high life. Well, this is the price of admission. When you bet everything on a fraud, you lose everything when the bill comes due. I walked over to the door and opened it. I stood there holding it open, waiting. But they did not move. They stood there frozen in their denial. Connor suddenly stood up. A dark look crossed his face. The fear was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered rage. He looked at the eviction notice. Then, he looked at me. You think you are so smart? He sneered. You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me? You think because you have money you can control people? I have money, because I control myself, Connor, I said. There is a difference. He took a step toward me. His hands were balled into fists. The vein in his neck was throbbing. I am not leaving, he said, his voice rising to a shout. This is my home. I have rights. You're going to get out of here before I make you get out. Malik stepped in front of me, blocking Connor's path. I would think very carefully about your next move, Connor. Malik said, his voice low and dangerous. Connor didn't listen. He was past listening. He was a rat in a trap and he was going to bite. He lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate attack. He swung a fist wildly at Malik, screaming something incoherent about entitlement and respect, but he never made contact. The elevator doors slid open behind us. Two large men in dark tactical uniforms stepped out. They moved with the speed and precision of trained professionals. Before Connor could even finish his swing, one of the men had seized his arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced motion. Connor shrieked in pain as he was forced down onto his knees. His face was pressed against the cheap polyester rug he had claimed was a Persian antique. Let me go, he screamed, kicking at the floor. This is assault. I will sue you. The second security officer stepped forward and placed a pair of zip ties on Connor's wrists. Mr. Johnson, the officer said, looking at Malik. We secured the perimeter. NYPD is in the lobby. They are on their way up. Malik nodded, adjusting his cuffs. Thank you, gentlemen. Please ensure the trash is taken out. Tiana screamed. It was a long, piercing sound that shattered the last remnants of the dinner party facade. She fell to her knees beside Connor, trying to pull the security guard's hands off him. Stop it, she sobbed. You are hurting him. Please stop. Francesca, make them stop. I looked down at my sister. She was on the floor in her designer knockoff dress, weeping for a man who had tried to bankrupt her. She looked pathetic. She looked broken. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. The police are coming, Tiana, I said. I suggest you get up. Unless you want to be arrested as an accessory to fraud. Tiana froze. Accessory. Yes, I said. You signed the lease application too, didn't you? As a guarantor. Tiana went pale. Connor told me it was just a formality, she whispered. He said he just needed a second signature for the insurance. He lied, I said. He used your credit history, what little you have, to secure this place because his own credit is toxic. Which means when the police get here, They are going to have some questions for you too. Tiana scrambled backward, crawling away from Connor as if he were radioactive. I didn't know, she gasped, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. I swear, Jazz, I didn't know. Connor twisted his head up from the floor, spitting on the rug. She knew, he shouted. She knew everything. She knew I was broke. She didn't care as long as she got her wedding. She is just as greedy as I am. You liar! Tiana shrieked. Enough, Malik said, his voice booming over the chaos. The elevator chimed again. This time it was not security. It was two uniformed NYPD officers, followed by a detective in a plain suit. Which one is Connor Sterling? The detective asked, looking around the room. The security guard hauled Connor to his feet. That is him, Malik said, pointing. And here is the file I promised you, detective. Identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny. The detective took the red folder. He opened it, glanced at the contents, and nodded. Connor Sterling, you are under arrest, he said, reciting the words we had all heard 1,000 times on television. You have the right to remain silent. As they dragged Connor toward the elevator, he didn't look at Tiana. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with a pure, unadulterated hatred. This isn't over, Francesca, he yelled as the doors closed. I will get you for this. The door slid shut, cutting off his threats. The room was suddenly very quiet. Just the sound of Tiana weeping on the floor, and my mother standing by the window looking old and defeated. But I wasn't done. There was one last loose end to tie up, one last lie to dismantle. I pulled out my phone again. I dialed a number I had saved in my contacts years ago. Who are you calling now? Beatrice asked, her voice a whisper. He is gone, Francesca. You won. What more do you want? I want the truth, Mother, I said. The whole truth. I pressed the speaker button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a professional voice answered. The Plaza Hotel Events Department. This is Sarah speaking. How may I assist you? Hello, Sarah? I said, my voice clear and steady. This is Francesca Williams. I am a Platinum American Express cardholder. The last 4 digits are 4,298. Yes, Ms. Williams, Sarah said, her tone brightening instantly. How can I help you this evening? I am calling regarding a wedding booking for a Miss Tiana Williams scheduled for June 12th, I said, looking directly at Tiana, who lifted her tear-streaked face from the floor. One moment, please, Sarah said. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Ah, yes. The Winter Wonderland package. We have the deposit on file charged to your card ending in 4,298. Yes, I said. I am calling to report that charge as unauthorized. My card information was stolen. There was a pause on the line. I see, Sarah said, her voice becoming serious. I am so sorry to hear that, Ms. Williams. We take security very seriously. I would like to cancel the booking immediately, I continued. And I would like to formally request that the deposit be refunded to my account pending the fraud investigation. Of course, Sarah said. I am processing the cancellation now. The date has been released. And we will issue a full refund to your card. Is there anything else? Yes, I said. Please make a note in the file. Any future attempts to book under the name Tiana Williams or Connor Sterling using my financial information should be flagged for law enforcement. Understood, Ms. Williams. It is done. Have a good evening. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. It is done, I said. There is no wedding. There is no venue. There is no deposit. Tiana let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a dream dying. She curled into a ball on the rug, burying her face in her hands. My wedding, she moaned. My beautiful wedding. You never had a wedding, Tiana, I said ruthlessly. You had a delusion. You were marrying a criminal in a venue you couldn't afford, paid for with money you stole from your sister. Beatrice walked over to me. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and hard. Are you happy now? She asked. You have destroyed everything. Your sister is broken. Her fiancé is in jail. And we are homeless. Does that make you feel big, Francesca? Does that make you feel powerful? It makes me feel safe, I said. And that is all I have ever wanted. I turned to Malik. Let us go home. Malik nodded. He put his arm around my waist, guiding me toward the elevator. Wait, Beatrice called out. Francesca, wait. You cannot leave us here. The security guard said we have to leave. Where are we supposed to go? I stopped. I didn't turn around. I hear Atlantic City has cheap rooms this time of year, I said. Maybe you can win back the money you lost. I stepped into the elevator. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was my mother and sister standing amidst the ruins of their fake life, looking small and insignificant against the backdrop of the city they tried to conquer, but never understood. 6 months later, the air smelled of salt and wild roses. I sat on the teak deck of our rental property in the Hamptons, a glass of chilled Sancerre in my hand, watching the waves crash against the dunes. This was real luxury. Not gold-plated fixtures or rented penthouses, but the luxury of time. The luxury of silence. The luxury of knowing that everything around me was paid for, earned, and mine. Malik was down on the beach throwing a frisbee for the golden retriever we had adopted 2 months ago. I watched him run, his laughter carrying on the breeze. He looked younger, freer. The stress of the merger was behind him, and the shadow of my family was finally gone. My phone buzzed on the table next to me. I picked it up. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. But I knew immediately who it was. Francesca, please. It is Mom. I am at the clinic. My blood pressure is so high. Tiana is working at a Target, but it is not enough. We are staying in a motel in Queens. Please. I just need money for my medication. Do not let your mother die. I read the message. I analyzed the data. I knew for a fact that Beatrice had Medicaid. Her prescriptions were covered. I knew that Tiana was indeed working at Target, because a friend had seen her there, scanning items with a look of utter misery. And I knew that the money she was asking for wasn't for medicine. It was for the debt collectors who were still hounding them for Connor's unpaid loans. Connor was currently serving a 3-year sentence in upstate New York. He had taken a plea deal to avoid a longer trial. He wrote Tiana letters, promising he would make it up to her, promising he had a new plan. And she believed him. She visited him every weekend, spending her paycheck on his commissary fund. They were caught in a loop, a cycle of toxicity that would never end unless someone broke it. I had broken it. I opened my banking app. I typed in the number for the burner phone my mother was using. I entered an amount, $50. In the memo line I typed 10 words, for the taxi to the job center. Do not call again. I hit send. Then I went to the settings menu. I blocked the number. I put the phone down, face down on the table. I picked up my wine glass. The wine was crisp and cold with notes of citrus and mineral. It tasted like truth. Malik waved to me from the beach, beckoning me to come down. I stood up. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean ocean air. For 35 years I had measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could fix, how much I could endure. I had been the safety net for people who carried scissors. But standing there in the sunlight, I realized that the ledger was finally balanced. I didn't owe them my future. I didn't owe them my peace. And I certainly didn't owe them $45,000 for flowers. I walked down the stairs to the sand, leaving the phone and the past behind me. I am coming. I called out to my husband. And as I ran toward the water, I didn't look back. Not once. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward something. And that made all the difference. The hardest lesson I learned wasn't about finance. It was about self-worth. For years I believed my value lay in what I could give to people who only knew how to take. But I realized that you cannot save people who are determined to drown, and you certainly don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. True peace only arrives when you close the ledger on toxic relationships, and accept that family is defined by mutual respect, not just DNA.